I thought I knew my life. My name's Gabriel Hartman, and for the past 15 years, I've been the dependable guy, the one who always had his feet firmly planted on the ground. A financial analyst by trade, a family man at heart, or so I believed. My wife, Isabel, was my polar opposite. Charismatic, spontaneous, and fiercely private. Maybe that was part of her allure. Then there was Chloe, her daughter from a previous relationship. I'd raised Chloe as my own, never once questioning the love I felt for her. It all started one unassuming Saturday morning when I decided to clean the garage. Isabel had been nagging about the clutter, and I figured tackling it might score me some brownie points. It was one of those mundane tasks where you don't expect to stumble onto life-altering revelations. Yet, that's exactly what happened. Tucked away in a corner behind dusty boxes of Christmas ornaments, I found it, a small, scuffed suitcase I'd never seen before. It wasn't much to look at, just an old piece of luggage with a broken handle, but something about it felt out of place. My gut told me to open it. Inside was chaos wrapped in deceit. Love letters, neatly folded but aged, addressed to Isabel in handwriting I didn't recognize. Hotel receipts from cities Isabel had claimed to visit for work. Photos of her with a man I had never met, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years. My hands shook as I sifted through the contents, piecing together a timeline of her betrayal. The man in the photos was Nathan Hale, her college flame. The weight of what I was holding didn't fully sink in until I came across one last envelope, marked for Chloe. Inside were documents, birth records, a DNA test, and a letter from Isabel. The words blurred as I read them, but their meaning hit like a freight train. Chloe wasn't my daughter. She was Nathan's. My world cracked wide open. I confronted Isabel that evening, the suitcase sitting between us on the living room floor like a Pandora's box. At first, she tried to play dumb, acting shocked that I dare invade her privacy. But as I began pulling out piece after piece of evidence, her facade crumbled. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. Instead, she tried to justify it. "It was never supposed to go this far, Gabriel," she said, her voice cold and defensive. "Nathan and we just had unresolved feelings. And Chloe—" "Don't you dare bring Chloe into this," I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. "You lied to me. You let me believe she was mine." Her expression twisted, not with guilt, but irritation. "You were a better father than Nathan ever could have been. Isn't that enough?" Enough? That was her justification for 15 years of lies? My mind raced, not just with the betrayal, but with the realization that Chloe had been complicit. The lies, the secrecy, they had been in it together. I walked out that night, needing air, needing space. But as I stood in the cold, staring at the quiet suburban street, I realized that walking away wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't erase the betrayal or make them understand the pain they had caused. No, I needed to make them feel it, every ounce of it. That's when the plan began to take shape. The house was silent when I returned the next morning. Isabel and Chloe were both gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter in Isabel's familiar script. "We need space to process. Chloe and I will be at my sister's." Space? She thought this was about space? No mention of the lies, the years of deception, or the fact that she'd ripped apart the foundation of our family. Just space. Fine. If they wanted space, I'd give them all the space in the world. Permanently. I spent the day doing what I do best. Analyzing. My career taught me to spot patterns, uncover inconsistencies, and anticipate outcomes. Now, I was applying those skills to dismantling the life Isabel and Chloe had built on my trust. The first step was securing my finances. Isabel knew I handled all the money, but she didn't know just how far ahead I thought. Over the years, I'd set up separate accounts, just in case money, I called it. At the time, I figured it was for emergencies. I never dreamed it would be for this. By midday, I had transferred the bulk of our joint savings into those accounts. The house mortgage was solely in my name. Isabel had insisted on that when we bought it, claiming she didn't want the hassle of dealing with the paperwork. Now it was my trump card. Next, I went digging for evidence. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted to bury her. The suitcase had given me a head start, but I needed more. I pulled old phone bills and cross-checked the dates of her so-called work trips with the receipts from the suitcase. The overlap was damning. Credit card statements revealed hotel charges, dinners for two, and expensive gifts she'd bought Nathan, on my dime. I even found a few emails she hadn't deleted, tucked away in a rarely used account. They were filled with professions of love and plans for their future. The future she'd stolen from me. By evening, my dining table was covered in papers, photos, and timelines. It was like piecing together a puzzle, and the picture it painted was one of betrayal at every turn. The rage simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over, but I kept it in check. Anger was a distraction. I needed focus. The last piece of the puzzle was Chloe. The DNA test from the suitcase had been a gut punch, but I needed my own confirmation. I called a discreet lab in town and scheduled a test for the next day. It wasn't easy, taking a stray hair from Chloe's old hairbrush while my hands trembled, but it had to be done. If Isabel had lied about this, I couldn't trust anything without proof. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls that had once held laughter, love, and a life I thought was real. I tried to remember the last time Isabel and I had been truly happy. Maybe it was that trip to Maui years ago when Chloe was still a teenager. Isabel had seemed distant even then, but I brushed it off as work stress. Was it ever real? Or had it all been an elaborate act to keep me in place as the provider, the fool who'd never question anything? When the clock struck midnight, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. An old college friend who had become one of the best divorce lawyers in the state. Gabriel. His voice was groggy but alert. Long time no. Dan, I interrupted, my voice steady. I need your help. It's about Isabel. He didn't ask for details. Not yet. That was the kind of friend Dan was. Let's meet tomorrow, he said simply. I hung up and stared out the window into the dark. Isabel and Chloe thought they could manipulate me, that I'd roll over and take this. They underestimated me. The game had just begun, and I intended to play it to win. The DNA test results came back faster than I expected. When I picked up the envelope, the weight of it felt heavier than it should have. I already knew the answer, but holding the evidence in my hands felt different. More final. I opened it right there in the lab's parking lot. Probability of paternity. 0%. It wasn't a surprise, but seeing it in black and white still knocked the wind out of me. For 15 years, I'd been dad. I'd read bedtime stories, taught her to ride a bike, and cheered at her school plays. Every memory felt like a cruel joke now. She wasn't mine. She was his. That evening, Isabel called. I didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail. A minute later, she texted, claiming we needed to talk things through like adults. It was laughable. She hadn't acted like an adult when she lied, cheated, and humiliated me. But I agreed to meet, knowing I'd need to look her in the eye when I laid out my plans. We met at a cafe on the other side of town, somewhere neutral. She arrived 10 minutes late, dressed like she was heading to a business meeting, her expression calm and composed. It was a stark contrast to my simmering rage. "I'm glad you came," she started, her tone too casual, like she wasn't sitting across from the man whose life she'd torn apart. "We need to figure out the next steps. For Chloe, if nothing else." "Chloe?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "You mean Nathan's daughter?" Her face twitched, but she recovered quickly. "I know this is hard." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice low but sharp. "Don't you dare act like you're the victim here. You lied to me for 15 years, Isabel. 15 years of letting me believe I was her father. Do you even grasp what that means?" She sighed, like I was inconveniencing her. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact like this. And you were a better father to Chloe than Nathan ever could have been. You should be proud of that." "Proud?" I laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable. You didn't give me a choice. You stole my choice, Isabel. And don't even get me started on your little love affair." Her calm demeanor started to crack. "Nathan and I were complicated. It wasn't black and white." "Complicated?" I shot back. "That's your excuse? You weren't complicated, Isabel. You were selfish." Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward. "Fine. I was selfish. But what do you want me to say, Gabriel? I can't undo what's already done." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd loved with the stranger sitting across from me. "You're right. You can't undo it. But don't think for a second that you'll walk away from this unscathed. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, her voice rising slightly. It means, I said evenly, you're about to find out exactly what it feels like to lose everything. I left before she could respond, my heart pounding as I walked to my car. The conversation had solidified my resolve. Isabel had made her choices, and now it was my turn. That night, I started the next phase of my plan. First, I drafted an airtight affidavit documenting Isabel's infidelity and the financial misconduct I'd uncovered. The emails, receipts, and photos were all cataloged and ready. Dan had promised me that with this evidence, I'd have no trouble cutting Isabel off from any claim to our assets. The next step was Chloe. It wasn't about hurting her. She was young when this all started, too young to fully understand the lies. But she wasn't innocent anymore. She'd helped her mother cover the affair, lied to my face, and betrayed me. She'd made her choice, and I couldn't protect her anymore. I logged into the savings account I'd maintained for her college fund, hesitating for only a moment before transferring the balance into my private account. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was a correction. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing down on me. But for the first time since I'd found the suitcase, I felt something besides rage or despair. I felt clarity. This wasn't just about punishing Isabel or Nathan. It was about reclaiming my life, and making sure they'd never forget the cost of betraying me. The day after my confrontation with Isabel, I set the wheels in motion to dismantle her carefully crafted life. While she and Chloe remained at her sister's house, I returned to my own, a house I now viewed as mine, no longer a shared space. The betrayal had severed any emotional ties I felt toward the home's memories. It was now a fortress, the base of operations for what came next. I began by combing through our shared finances with the precision of a surgeon. Isabel's arrogance had left a trail a mile wide. She thought she was clever, filing fraudulent expense reports at her job to cover her trysts with Nathan. I compiled the evidence meticulously, receipts from hotels booked under her work account, Uber trips marked as business meetings, and dinners for two charged to her company credit card. Once I had everything, I packaged it neatly in a manila folder and mailed it anonymously to her company's HR department. I knew it wouldn't take long for them to connect the dots. A marketing executive fudging numbers might be tolerable under minor circumstances. But this? It would torpedo her career. I pictured her face when the call came from HR, the humiliation sinking in as her perfect work facade crumbled. It wasn't petty, it was justice. The house was next. Legally, it was in my name, and the divorce filings would solidify that. But I didn't just want Isabel gone. I wanted to erase her. Over the next few days, I redecorated, stripping the house of any trace of her influence. Photos of us as a family were replaced with minimalist artwork. Chloe's room became a storage space. Isabel's walk-in closet, once packed with designer clothes and shoes, was emptied. I boxed up her belongings and left them in the garage, a bitter echo of the suitcase where this nightmare began. Through all this, Chloe remained a lingering shadow in my mind. Part of me wanted to call her, to give her a chance to explain. But every time I considered it, the image of her standing beside Isabel, complicit in the lies, hardened my resolve. She wasn't the child I'd raised anymore. She was part of the betrayal. One evening, I received a frantic call from Isabel. Her voice was sharp and panicked, no longer the cool and composed tone she'd wielded at the cafe. "Gabriel, what did you do?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" I replied evenly, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "My company just put me on leave pending an investigation. They have emails, receipts, things they shouldn't have. This is your doing, isn't it?" I stayed silent for a moment, savoring the desperation in her voice. "I don't know what you're talking about," I finally said. "But maybe you should have thought about the consequences before dragging my name through the mud." "You can't ruin me," she shouted, her composure unraveling. "This isn't just about me. What about Chloe? She looks up to you. She loves you." The mention of Chloe stung, but I didn't let it show. "She made her choice, Isabel. Just like you did." "Don't punish her for my mistakes," Isabel pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'm not punishing her. I'm holding both of you accountable," I replied coldly. Enjoy your space, Isabel. You're going to need it. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, my lawyer, Dan, and I finalized the divorce papers. The evidence I provided painted Isabel in such a damning light that the outcome was clear-cut. No claim to the house, no share of my savings, and no spousal support. Dan even included a stipulation about her infidelity, ensuring the court couldn't sympathize with her. She'd walk away with nothing but the clothes I hadn't already packed up. That same day, I made the decision to sever ties with Chloe. I knew it wasn't entirely fair. She was young when the lies began, manipulated by her mother. But the older she got, the more she'd chosen to protect Isabel's secret rather than tell me the truth. I drafted a brief email explaining that while I'd always loved the child I raised, I couldn't maintain a relationship built on deceit. It was clinical, detached. A final goodbye. As the days passed, I waited for the fallout. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after sending the HR package, Isabel lost her job. She called me again, this time sobbing, but I let it go to voicemail. Her once polished reputation was now a smoldering wreck, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, word had started to spread in her professional circles. No one wanted to touch someone embroiled in scandal. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring balance. Isabel and Chloe had thrived at my expense for years, and now they were feeling the weight of their choices. Nathan Hale was next. Nathan Hale. The man who had not only stolen my wife's heart but fathered the child I had spent 15 years raising as my own. While Isabel's betrayal stung the most, Nathan's role in this twisted drama couldn't go unanswered. I was determined to ensure that his life crumbled just as thoroughly as mine had. I started by learning everything I could about him. It wasn't difficult. Nathan wasn't exactly subtle about his life. A quick internet search revealed he ran a small consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring. His professional image was carefully curated. Slick suits, motivational posts on LinkedIn, and a constant stream of self-congratulatory updates. He presented himself as a man who fixed problems, but I was about to give him one he couldn't solve. Through a private investigator I'd hired, I discovered that Nathan's firm had some skeletons in its closet. He'd been skirting compliance regulations for years, fudging numbers to make his clients' financials appear cleaner than they were. It wasn't outright fraud, but it was close enough to catch the attention of financial regulators if someone were to tip them off. I took my time preparing the dossier, ensuring every detail was precise. The investigator provided records of shady deals, doctored spreadsheets, and emails hinting at unethical practices. With everything neatly compiled, I sent the information anonymously to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was only a matter of time before the wolves came knocking at Nathan's door. But I didn't stop there. Nathan was married. His wife, Rebecca, was a socialite who prided herself on their picture-perfect marriage. I imagined how she'd feel knowing her husband had been carrying on an affair for years, fathering a child behind her back. With careful deliberation, I sent Rebecca a package. Inside were copies of Isabel's love letters, photos of her and Nathan together, and a handwritten note, "You deserve to know the truth." The fallout began almost immediately. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that Rebecca had kicked Nathan out of their home. She was pursuing divorce proceedings, and by all accounts, she wasn't pulling any punches. With her connections and their shared assets, Nathan was in for a brutal legal battle. Rumor had it she was going after their house, their savings, and custody of their 2 kids. Nathan's smug, curated life was unraveling faster than he could keep up. The icing on the cake came when regulators launched an audit into Nathan's firm. Within days, his biggest clients started pulling out, unwilling to risk their reputations by associating with him. The fines came next, crippling amounts that left him scrambling to keep the business afloat. By the end of the month, Nathan had shut down his company, and his name was effectively blacklisted in the industry. One evening, as I sat in my now quiet home, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Gabriel," a familiar voice said, strained and bitter. It was Nathan. "I know it was you. What can I say, Nathan?" I replied evenly. "Actions have consequences." "You've ruined me," he spat. "My wife, my business, everything. You've made your point. Now back off." I leaned back in my chair, savoring his desperation. Ruined you? No, Nathan. I've only given you a taste of what you deserve. Maybe next time you'll think twice before destroying someone else's family. You're sick, he hissed. And you're a coward, I shot back, my voice cold. But don't worry, Nathan. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on that while you're picking up the pieces of your life. I hung up before he could respond, feeling an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control again. Isabel and Nathan had stolen my peace, my family, and my future. But now, they were the ones floundering, struggling to salvage the wreckage of their choices. Yet, even as I celebrated Nathan's downfall, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that my work wasn't finished. There was still one more person who needed to feel the weight of what they'd done. Chloe. For days, I wrestled with what to do about Chloe. Cutting Isabel and Nathan out of my life had been straightforward. They were adults who had knowingly betrayed me. But Chloe? She was different. I'd raised her, taught her to ride a bike, wiped her tears after scraped knees, and sat through countless school plays. She wasn't my blood, but she had been my daughter. And yet, she had lied to me. Covered for her mother. Stood by silently while I was played for a fool. I couldn't ignore it. The turning point came when Chloe called me. Her voice was hesitant, almost timid, a stark contrast to the confident college sophomore I thought I knew. Gabriel, she began, carefully avoiding calling me Dad. Can we talk? I didn't want to talk. But I needed answers. Go ahead. I don't know where to start, she stammered. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this. Her apology only deepened my anger. So you did want me to find out? When, Chloe? After I paid for your college? After I walked you down the aisle? Or maybe never at all? Please don't say it like that, she pleaded. I didn't know how to tell you. Mom made it sound like it was better this way. I laughed bitterly. Better for who? Certainly not me. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice small and uncertain. I still see you as my dad, you know. I gripped the phone tighter, my anger flaring. You see me as your dad? After lying to me for years? After helping your mother betray me? I was a kid, she shot back, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to do. And when I got older, I just didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You succeeded. You didn't hurt me, you destroyed me. The line went quiet again. I could hear her sniffling, but it didn't move me. I had cried enough for both of us. Finally, she asked, what happens now? What happens now? That was the question I'd been asking myself ever since I found that cursed suitcase. Chloe wanted forgiveness, but forgiveness didn't undo the lies. It didn't erase the years of deceit or the hollow memories of a family that never truly existed. I don't know, I admitted. But I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I'm pulling your college fund, Chloe. What? She gasped. Gabriel, please don't. I'm not your father, Chloe, I said firmly. That's Nathan's job now. Let him pay for your tuition. Or maybe your mother can, now that she's unemployed. Her sobs on the other end of the line were sharp and guttural, but I didn't waver. She had made her choices, just like Isabel. And choices had consequences. I'm sorry, Chloe, I said, though my tone lacked sympathy. I hope you learn from this. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond, my heart heavy but resolute. That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. Cutting ties with Chloe felt like severing a piece of myself, but it had to be done. She wasn't the little girl I'd raised anymore. She was a stranger who had chosen loyalty to her mother over honesty with me. Over the next few weeks, Chloe's life began to unravel. Without her tuition covered, she was forced to drop out of college and take a job as a waitress. Mutual acquaintances told me she tried reaching out to Nathan, but he was in no position to help, his life a wreck after his business collapsed. Isabel was similarly useless, too consumed by her own downfall to be of any support. Chloe sent me a few texts, each one more desperate than the last. I read them but didn't respond. My silence was the only answer she'd get from me. And yet, as I watched her life spiral downward, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. There was no joy in seeing her struggle, only a grim sense of justice. She had chosen her side, and now she was living with the consequences. Still, part of me hoped she'd learn from this, that one day she'd understand the weight of her actions. But I wouldn't be there to see it. I'd given enough of myself to people who didn't deserve it. With Isabel, Nathan, and Chloe's lives in ruins, I should have felt complete. But the truth was, I didn't. There was one final piece of this nightmare I needed to address: rebuilding myself. The weeks following Chloe's collapse felt hollow. On the surface, I'd achieved what I set out to do. Isabel was jobless and humiliated, Nathan's career and marriage were in shambles, and Chloe was grappling with the weight of her choices. Yet, I wasn't at peace. The emptiness lingered, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I realized I had spent so much time dismantling their lives that I hadn't stopped to consider what came next for me. The first step was reclaiming my space. The house felt suffocating, filled with memories I no longer wanted to carry. The laughter that used to echo in the halls felt mocking now, a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. So, I began purging. I started with the photos. Every framed picture of Isabel, Chloe, and me went into a box in the garage, alongside her discarded belongings. The walls that once showcased family vacations and holidays were now bare. It wasn't sadness that filled me as I worked, it was determination. This wasn't erasing the past. It was making room for a new future. The furniture came next. The plush couch Isabel had insisted on, the dining set where we'd hosted countless family dinners, they all went. I sold them off and replaced them with pieces that felt like me. Sleek, minimalist, functional. For the first time, the house felt like mine. But the house was just the start. My career, the one constant in my life, had taken a back seat during the chaos. Now, it became my focus. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects and taking on new challenges. My colleagues noticed the change. My sharper focus, my longer hours, but I didn't care. Work was a distraction, a way to remind myself of what I was capable of building on my own. Yet, even as I immersed myself in my career, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I'd always prided myself on being reliable, someone others could count on. But now, with no one left to rely on me, I felt adrift. That's when the idea of the Foundation for Honesty came to me. It started as a spark, an idle thought during a sleepless night. What if I could take what I'd been through and use it to help others? There were countless men like me, blindsided by betrayal, left to pick up the pieces without a roadmap. What if I could provide that roadmap? The next morning, I began sketching out a plan. The foundation would be a resource for men dealing with infidelity, offering legal advice, emotional support, and financial guidance. I knew how isolating betrayal could feel, and I wanted to create a space where others wouldn't have to face it alone. I funded the foundation with what remained of the money I'd saved for my family's future, a future that no longer existed. It felt poetic, in a way, to use those funds to build something meaningful. Within months, the Foundation for Honesty was up and running. We launched a website, hired a small team, and began hosting workshops and webinars. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from men sharing their stories, thanking us for giving them a voice. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of purpose. The Foundation's success brought me back into the public eye. I started giving interviews, sharing my story. Not the messy personal details, but the broader lessons about resilience and rebuilding. People began to recognize me, not as the man whose wife betrayed him, but as someone who had turned pain into progress. Through it all, I stayed true to my promise to cut Isabel and Chloe from my life. There were moments when I wondered if I'd made the right choice, especially with Chloe. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the lies, the betrayal, and the years of stolen trust. Forgiveness might come one day, but it wouldn't be today. As for Nathan and Isabel, their downward spiral continued. I heard through mutual connections that Isabel was struggling to find work, her reputation too tarnished to recover. Nathan, once a man of arrogance and charm, was now penniless and living out of his car. Neither reached out to me, and I was content to leave it that way. One evening, as I stood in my newly redecorated living room, looking out over the quiet neighborhood, I felt a strange mix of emotions. grief for the life I'd lost, pride in the man I was becoming, and hope for the future. The scars of betrayal would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. And this time, I was building something no one could take away from me. It was late one evening when I heard the knock at the door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor or a delivery left by mistake, but when I opened it, Isabel stood there. She looked nothing like the polished woman I had once known. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale and drawn, and her once pristine designer coat was frayed at the edges. "Gabriel," she said softly, her voice cracked and thin. "Can we talk?" Every instinct told me to shut the door, but curiosity, or maybe pity, held me back. "What do you want, Isabel?" I asked, my tone cold but controlled. She hesitated, clutching her purse tightly. I don't know where else to go." Her words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something more, but she just stood there, eyes darting nervously as if she expected me to slam the door in her face. And truthfully, I wanted to. But instead, I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She walked into the living room, her eyes darting around at the unfamiliar furniture and decorations. It must have been jarring for her to see the house stripped of any trace of her or Chloe. Good. It wasn't her home anymore. "I don't have much time, so make it quick," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling. "I've lost everything, Gabriel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My job. My reputation. Even Chloe. She's barely speaking to me. She blames me for all of this." I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. "I know I messed up," she continued, tears pooling in her eyes. "I lied to you, betrayed you, and I have to live with that every day. But Gabriel, I'm desperate. I'm sick, stress, they think, but it's getting worse. And I can't do this alone." There it was, the plea I'd been waiting for. She wasn't here to apologize or make amends. She was here because she needed something. She always had a knack for turning her mess into someone else's responsibility. "And what do you expect me to do about it, Isabel?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "You destroyed our family. You let me believe a lie for 15 years. You and Chloe both lied to my face. So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly charitable." She flinched at my words but pressed on. "I don't have anyone else, Gabriel. You were always the reliable one, the one I could count on." I laughed bitterly. "Reliable? That's rich. You didn't count on me, Isabel. You used me. You manipulated me into raising a child that wasn't mine while you played house with Nathan." Her face crumpled, and she started to cry, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that might have once stirred my compassion. But now, they felt hollow, manipulative. "I know I don't deserve your help," she choked out. "But I'm begging you. For Chloe's sake. Don't," I cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare bring Chloe into this again. She's made her choices, just like you. And now you both get to live with the consequences." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her expression one of pure desperation. "Gabriel, please." For a moment, I just stared at her, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to throw her out, to let her sink further into the mess she'd made. But another part, the part that still remembered the love I once had for the woman she used to be, hesitated. "Here's what's going to happen," I said finally, my voice cold and measured. "I'll give you the name of a local charity that can help you with food and housing. They've got resources for women in crisis. But beyond that, you're on your own." Her face fell, her tears coming harder now. "That's it? After everything we've been through, that's all you can offer?" "All we've been through?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You mean the lies, the betrayal, the years of stolen trust?" "Yeah, Isabel, that's all I can offer. You made your bed, now lie in it." She didn't respond, just sat there, her shoulders slumping in defeat. After a long silence, she stood up and walked to the door, her steps slow and unsteady. Before she left, she turned back to me, her face pale and broken. "I hope you find peace, Gabriel," she said softly. "I hope we both do." And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the closed door. A small part of me felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. Isabel's pain wasn't my responsibility anymore. My focus was on rebuilding my life, not saving hers. In the quiet of the house, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in months. Closure. Isabel's visit stirred something in me. Not guilt or pity, those feelings had long since been buried. What I felt was a renewed determination to see this through to the end. She was broken, Nathan was ruined, and Chloe was floundering. Yet, I still didn't feel like the scales were balanced. They had taken so much from me, and while their suffering was apparent, I wanted the closure of knowing their betrayal had been exposed to the world. The next step in my plan was public humiliation, not through vindictive rants or petty rumors, but with precision and purpose. The Foundation for Honesty had grown rapidly, gaining media attention for its work in exposing infidelity and supporting betrayed partners. Its rise had been fueled by the funds I'd salvaged from my life's wreckage, and now it was gaining momentum. The foundation hosted a gala that year, a grand event to celebrate its success and raise awareness for its mission. The night was an elegant affair, with local media, influential donors, and a few celebrities in attendance. I'd kept my story vague in interviews, focusing on the broader lessons rather than the sordid details. But tonight would be different. When I took the stage to deliver my keynote speech, the room fell silent. I looked out over the sea of faces, each one reflecting curiosity and admiration. It was the perfect moment. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "When I founded this organization, it wasn't out of ambition or charity. It was out of necessity. I was a man who had everything, a family I loved, a life I believed was real. And then, one day, it all came crashing down." The room was utterly still as I recounted my story. Not every detail, but enough for the audience to understand the depth of the betrayal. I spoke of the suitcase, the DNA test, and the lies that unraveled my world. I didn't name names, but the weight of the story was enough to leave an impression. This foundation exists because betrayal isn't just personal. It's systemic, I concluded. It destroys families, erodes trust, and leaves victims to pick up the pieces alone. My hope is that, through our work, we can turn pain into progress, just as I've tried to do. The audience erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. My mind was on Isabel and Chloe, wondering if they were watching. They'd undoubtedly heard about the gala, perhaps through mutual acquaintances or the buzz in the media. The thought of them seeing me thrive, knowing their betrayal had fueled something meaningful, was its own form of justice. The next day, my phone buzzed with notifications. Articles about the gala flooded my feed, many praising the foundation's mission and my speech. But what caught my attention was an anonymous tip that someone had submitted to our website, a grainy photo of Nathan, looking disheveled and gaunt, sitting in the parking lot of a convenience store. It was a far cry from the confident, suave man he'd once been. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, not sympathy, but perhaps closure. Nathan was finished. Isabel's downfall was public knowledge in her circles, and Chloe's struggles were a consequence of her own choices. They had taken everything from me, and now they had nothing left. And me? I had everything to gain. That evening, as I sat in my office at home, I looked around at the life I was building. The walls were no longer barren but adorned with plaques and photos from the foundation's milestones. The emptiness that had once consumed me was replaced with a quiet resolve. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The final blow wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about showing them, and myself, that betrayal didn't define me. My life wasn't theirs to ruin. It was mine to rebuild. The rain poured heavily that night, pattering against the windows as I sat in the living room, a cup of coffee warming my hands. Outside, the world was a blur of gray, but inside, there was a strange calm. The storm didn't unsettle me anymore. It felt fitting, like a final cleansing before the next chapter of my life began. In the weeks following the gala, the foundation had reached new heights. I became a familiar face on talk shows, not just as the man who had built the Foundation for Honesty but as a symbol of resilience. People sent letters, emails, and messages thanking me for giving them hope. It wasn't just about the foundation. It was about showing that betrayal didn't have to destroy you. Then, one rainy afternoon, I received an email from Chloe. For a moment, I hesitated to open it, my finger hovering over the screen. I'd ignored her earlier messages, convinced there was nothing left to say. But this one felt different. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I opened it, bracing myself for the contents. "Gabriel, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything I did, and I realize now just how much I hurt you. I can't imagine the pain you felt when you found out the truth. I've made so many mistakes, and I hate myself for them. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I dropped out of school because of my choices, and I've been working long hours to stay afloat. It's been humbling, to say the least. I still think of you as my dad, even if you don't think of me as your daughter. I'll always be grateful for the years you gave me, for the love you showed me, even if I didn't deserve it. I'm sorry for everything. Chloe." Her words lingered in my mind long after I'd closed the email. There was sincerity in her tone, a rawness I hadn't seen before. It wasn't an excuse or a plea for sympathy. It was an acknowledgement of the damage she'd done. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something resembling forgiveness. Not for Isabel or Nathan, but for Chloe. She'd been young, caught in her mother's web of lies, and while she'd made her own choices later, I couldn't ignore the bond we'd once shared. She had been my little girl, and part of me still wanted to believe she could learn from this. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the email sit, giving myself time to process. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but it wasn't impossible. Maybe one day, I'd be ready to reach out to Chloe. Maybe not. Either way, the decision would be mine. As for Isabel and Nathan, they were relics of a life I had left behind. Isabel had reportedly fallen seriously ill, and Nathan was scraping by on menial jobs. Mutual acquaintances occasionally tried to share updates, but I shut them down quickly. Their lives no longer concerned me. I was done looking back. One evening, I stood in the hallway, staring at the empty space where a family portrait used to hang. It had been replaced with an award from the Foundation for Honesty, a symbol of what I had built from the ashes of my life. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, it was Dan, my lawyer and old friend, holding a bottle of bourbon. "You've been working too hard," he said with a grin. "Thought I'd drag you out for some fresh air." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're not giving me a choice, are you?" "Nope," he replied, stepping inside. "Come on, Hartman. Time to start living again." As we walked out into the night, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. For the first time in months, I felt light, as if the weight I'd been carrying had finally lifted. The past would always be there, a shadow in the corner of my mind, but it didn't define me anymore. The storm was over. It was time to move forward.